Welcome to this episode of Photo Theology, and I'm your host Doug. And today we're going to be looking at the Canon G1 X. The Canon G1 X is a new model in the Canon lineup. It's actually going to be part of a new family, and basically, it's Canon's way of trying to combat the traditional compact SLR. Now, by traditional, what I mean is that compact SLRs have been around for a long time. Uh, you have seen an uptick in sales in the past recent years, but they've been around for a very, very, very long time. One brand that comes to mind is Leica. Leica's been making compact SLRs for quite a while, and I mean, it's something they've been very successful at. Well, now you have Sony, you have Olympus, you have Panasonic, and Pentax, Nikon just jumped into it. Olympus is, or I'm sorry, Fuji is working on it right now, and Canon and Nikon have both struggled because in Asia, what happened in I want to say it was about 2 quarters ago in sales, a quarter or two ago. Traditionally, Nikon and Canon had taken 90% of the SLR market. Well, compact SLRs ended up taking 35% of the market. That means both Canon and Nikon saw a reduction of 25% combined in their SLR market. Nikon came out with the J, which we haven't talked about the J1 yet on Photo Theology, but we will at some point. And Canon has now come out with their G1 X. Now, the G1 X is their answer to this situation they're in. What we have decided to do here is take the newly released shots of the G1 X and post them up online. I'm sorry, post them up on YouTube. Well, yeah, online in this YouTube clip. The shots that you're actually going to see come from Digital Camera Review or DP Review, and they actually took these shots themselves. I do have the information for each shot on there, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to examine each of the shots, and we are going to look at how good the pictures actually look. Now, granted, these pictures were taken in a basic JPEG mode. However, I do have to I have to stress, I have to stress the fact that the Canon G1X runs $800. That's supposed to be its street price tag. After reviewing the shots today, I had gotten into a conversation with an individual, and he was preaching this thing up. And I had duly noted that after seeing the shots Canon GX, that the camera has some flaws. It just has some basic flaws. One of the big things that I saw was the lack. The Canon does not seem to do well with detail. I noticed this in a variety of pictures. Now, it was released, I want to say it was either last Friday or Saturday, an ISO test. And I will be the first one to sit up here and say I was very impressed with the G1X's ISO test. However, there were two things that struck out at me. First off, the ISO test that they did was not a traditional style of ISO test. That was the first thing. The second thing was the white balancing and whatnot. The images just didn't look as what I would consider to be about the test impressive. The objects they chose were clearly not that impressive. But the shots that they showed today, I was way more interested in that they released this morning. But right away was, first off, when you crop the sucker to the full, and you see this right now as I talk, but you crop the sucker to the full megapixel. What happens is you see the image lack sharpness. It just simply does. And I'm not talking about sharpness in terms of depth of field. Okay, so some people are going to look at this and go, well, Doug, this one picture here was shot at a depth of field of, 5, this one here 2.8, so on and so forth. That's not the kind of sharpness I'm talking about. I shoot with a Tamron 28 to 75 millimeter lens. For those of you who have, use that lens, you know at the 50 millimeter length, it's an incredibly sharp lens. So this kind of makes me a little biased towards other, lenses, just in general when it comes to sharpness. When it comes to sharpness, it's extremely weak. The other area that I noticed it's actual composing of images. Now, granted, this is a basic JPEG, but I do have to stress the camera's also dollars. If you are going to want me to spend $800 on your camera, then when it takes a basic shot, it better bring a D plus game. But if you look here and you see the shading here of the people next to the bridge, you'll notice that you have a lot of pixelation there and you have a lot of noise. You'll also notice that there's a lack of detail to a certain degree. And keep in mind, this is not being shot at a high ISO. This is being shot at a very low ISO. So this is one of those things that stands out in my mind and, makes me wonder, wow, does Canon really have their stuff together with the G1 X? Now, the image here of the bridge is, I want to say, a fairly decent. I expect these kind of results out of like the S95, maybe the S100. I do not expect these kind of results out of a G1 X, which is supposed to be using a APS-C sensor. That I do not expect. I expect better than that. And for $800, I would hope that Canon would be able to bring their A game and bring me something that is really worth what I'd be spending the money on. Now, as far as the other exposure goes in the image that we look at here, the image, I want to say, is a little overexposed in some areas. I'm not going to hold that against the image simply because this is a very two-toned exposure. I mean, you basically have, a bridge, and it's either, I want to say, dawn or dusk. It's going in and out of one of those. And of course, I want to say you have heavy, shadows, in the image. But another one was this one here, where I thought the Canon completely just failed. The first thing is this. You look at the trees in this image. Okay, look at the trees. There is no detail there whatsoever. It's like a brown smudge, which is totally unexcusable. There's no reason why trees should be looking like brown smudges. The guy who I talked to, that's kind of funny. The guy who I talked to, he talked about the Panasonic GF3, and he talked about how he owned that and he didn't like it. And I was thinking about the Canon that he was when he was trying to brag to me about the G1 X. I was thinking about the Canon versus the Panasonic, and I had already seen the images he hadn't seen. And I thought about these trees. And I remember with the Panasonic GF3, one of the things I really like about that camera is its level of detail. For this kind of money, I could buy the Panasonic GF3 and I could get the 20mm 1.7 lens. And it would do a drastically, I'm talking drastically, better performance in terms of the actual detail in this image. Also, if you just look at the image overall, you're going to see a level of, I don't even want to call it softness, although I guess you could technically say it's soft, but it's almost like the sensor is working in overdrive to be able to try to bring you the multiple contrasts in this image. I mean, it's working pretty hard. If you look at the building here, the building doesn't look sharp. It doesn't look solid. Once again, you also see the trees there, and you do have multiple, I want to say, exposures going on in the image. You definitely do. I'm not denying any of that, which always does tend to complicate things. But at the same time, if you're going to be using an APS-C sensor, there's no reason why the trees should look like just like one dark smudge. And then within the shadows of the trees, because you have no branches there or anything, it's just one dark smudge, you have, all this noise going on too. It's just not impressive. It just seems like a very underperforming camera. Right down to, if you look at the, the bricks at the bottom here, um, once again you can see the noise, you can see the things that don't look right, you can see the lack of composure that's there. We're not talking about so much depth of field as we're talking about the sensor's inability. We're just talking the sensor's inability here to compose the image the way the image should be composed. So, like I was saying, the gentleman, he at the time, um, we were talking, he was talking about the Canon versus the Panasonic, and he was, talking about how the Canon's ISOs are better than the Panasonic, so on and so forth. Which I'll be the first one to say, Canon typically does have better ISOs than Panasonic, but Panasonic, as a general rule, has a sharper image than Canon. It's a trade-off there. But even in this image here, we're talking 3200 ISO indoors, and I mean, look at the level, or the lack of level, of details in the bricks. Look at the smudginess that you have there. I mean, it just, I think that the $800 price tag for this camera is a bit too high. I think honestly, this should cost as much as the G12 does, or raise it another 100. You could do that, make it $600, but to make it 800, I really just don't see the value in it. And I'm not a Kool-Aid drinker. That's the thing. I'm not one of these people that says, "Oh, Canon came out with a brand new camera. Oh, I'm a Canon user. Oh man, this is completely awesome." I mean, I've already showed you guys how the Pentax K5 literally whooped the 5D Mark II's ass when it came to ISO control. I'm one of these people that goes where the technology is. That's what I do. And one thing I really do not like are underperforming cameras, like what you've got going on here with the G1 X. Now, maybe the raw capability on this camera will be significantly better. I mean, keep in mind, these are basic JPEG images, but for $800, I mean, a basic JPEG image should be better than this. Or at least I would assume that it would be better than, this for $800. But, them's the breaks. I guess that's how I had to look at it. As you go through and you look at this, I will say this: the camera does do an overall solid job when it comes to light metering. I will say that. I think the light metering with the camera is pretty good. I do think that it does tend to overexpose in some areas. But once again, that also goes back to the fact that we are talking about a JPEG image here. So if you were shooting in RAW, you would definitely be able to go through the camera, and you'd be able to obviously edit, certain functions, and that would make perfect sense. Now, here was an image that really took me by surprise. This is pretty much one of the two images that really put me against the Canon here. And this is honestly what drove me to want to do this review after I talked to the individual. There was simply just no excuse for this. When they took this image here, I simply just could not believe the lack of quality that was right there in the image. I simply couldn't believe it. And I know after looking at the S100, Canon has been able to drastically improve their RAW over their JPEG just based on what the S100 does. I mean, it is true that the RAW images are significantly better than the JPEG images. But if that is the case, and I mean this sincerely, if it's the case, then just stop shooting in JPEG altogether. If you can't produce a solid JPEG image, a basic JPEG image, mind you, if you can't produce a solid basic JPEG camera that looks like a $300 camera took its picture, then why waste your time with this at all? And that's a fair thing to say. And I think it's a fair thing to ask. I mean, I do shoot in RAW all the time, but I'll be the first one to say that, sometimes it's just fine to shoot in JPEG. Now, the gentleman who I was talking to, he actually tried to compare this unit to the Sony Nex 5N, and I about died of laughter when he did this. Now, granted, he may have had some biases towards the Canon. I assume that he did. Um, I definitely assume it. And when we were talking about ISOs, I found it funny because he was talking about how you really can't shoot in high ISOs and keep a decent amount of detail. And I told him that I owned a Nex 3, Sony Nex 3, and I said if you use the anti-blur mode, actually you can keep some decent detail, some okay detail, and you can shoot at like a 6400 ISO. Now, normally when I apply that kind of logic, I am looking at it from a standpoint of shooting, people and stuff like that in low lit situations. When I use the anti-blur mode with the Sony, that's what I do. But I think one of the things that's really doing the Canon injustice, and this last image here will be at a 12,000 light rating. You'll see how well this works out for the Canon. It's garbage. The image is just complete total garbage. I couldn't even believe that Canon even allowed these shots to be posted of the unit. Or at least this one. It looks like total crap though. But I think this is Canon's mistake with the G1 X. Here's the mistake. It needs interchangeable lenses. Point, period, blank. This is not an image from an $800 camera. This looks like an image from a camera that's about $500, maybe $600 at best. Canon needs to eat their pride, make it an interchangeable lens camera so you can pop better lenses on there so you can get sharper quality and hopefully reduce your noise. And once again, when you look at the shadows here, the shadows are horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I mean, not only do you have, it's not even like a lack of detail, it's just it's just bad no matter how you want to look at it. It's bad. And I understand the whole, lighting situation here. I'm not ignorant to that. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that it's being shot at a 12,000 ISO. I'm not ignorant to either of those things. The fact that it's being shot in JPEG. But what I am saying is that Canon can do better than this. They can. And quite honestly, I expect better than this from Canon. I do. I guess what I'd basically be saying is you need to take your asses back to the drawing board. Produce this camera. Obviously, you've already stuck on everything, and you've obviously got factories going to produce it. But instead of making it $800, make it 5 or 6. Make it 5 or 6. Eat your pride. Make an interchangeable lens. Charge $800 for that. Okay. Allow the older Canon lenses to be used. Don't allow Sony to use their smart for Canon lenses on their necks. I mean, hell, that's what you might as well do if you're going to get this thing. Shit, just sit up here and do that. You get better results doing that with the 5N. But you guys go ahead and post your comments after this. You can tell me what you think. And I will be doing another video with RAW later. Let you know. All right, bye-bye.